right, welcome back to the Nexus podcast. Stephen Sim, the chair of the OT-ISAC Advisory Committee, is my guest, and we're going to talk about all things that are happening within the OT-ISAC, as well as some of the trends that he's seeing and discussing with members around the protection of connected OT systems. I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation. I know OT-ISAC is doing a lot of good work and has a lot of members that are really contributing. So I'm excited that Stephen is here. Before we get started, I just wanted to share my usual reminder to please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. We are everywhere, including Apple, Spotify, Amazon, you name it. We're on every platform. So it's really the best way to keep up with the show. And I really appreciate the support. It's been really outstanding. So like I said, it's the best way to keep up with the show and all the guests I have coming up. So with that, let's get started and bring in Stephen. How are you, Stephen? Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, really, Michael. Thanks. Yeah, happy to share.
I've been looking forward to this. I think most of the audience is probably familiar with OT-ISAC, but tell me about your role kind of with the advisory committee. What's kind of like your day-to-day and your responsibilities with that committee?
Yeah, let me share a bit more about the advisory committee. So, yes, I currently chair this committee. This committee is made out of largely volunteers and include representatives from both governments and private sector organizations. Essentially, we help to steer the roadmap for the OT-ISAC. As you are probably already aware, OT-ISAC was the second key thrust of the first Singapore OT Cybersecurity Master Plan in 2019 and continues to be the second key thrust of the Master Plan in 2024, therefore underscoring its importance to the ecosystem at national level as well as globally.
And how many regular participants, how many members do you have at the current time?
So we have about 100 members, login members who log into our platforms, and many of them do participate in our monthly track calls and as well as regular members get together events, both virtually as well as physically.
So obviously the core charter of the OTI-SAC is information sharing about incidents and threats that within OT enterprises. Just in general terms, how willing are you seeing organizations to participate in what can be very sensitive discussions? I'm sure that a lot of this information is sanitized once it's shared, but just to kind of bring people to the table, is it a challenge? Is it become a little easier over the years that the OTI-SAC has been operating?
You're right that the core charter is information sharing about incidents and threats. We do also share vulnerability intelligence. We run tabletop exercises. We also conduct risk assessments for our member organizations. We run seminars and conferences as well, and training curriculum for both OT engineers and cyber practitioners. So, with regards to the core charter of information sharing, you were asking about how willing organizations participate in these sensitive discussions and whether it has changed over the years. I think increasingly organizations are more willing to share because they realize that we are only as strong as our ecosystem. And black swan events do occur. I think the NotPetya in I think it's 2017. That was
Mm-hmm.
really a watershed moment, I would say, in cybersecurity terms, right? Um, Entire organizations being taken offline, resulting in breaches costing upwards to not just USD 300 million, but to USD 1.4 billion as well, right? Damages to the organization, and then as well as downstream impact to the whole economy. So this was in fact one of the larger wake up calls to many organizations who realize that the ability to get the latest threat intelligence, right? Having access to early warning systems is a good way to flip the asymmetry of attacks and be able to stay at the front of this intelligence and be able to react and deploy countermeasures before the attack reaches the shore. So they are increasingly willing to participate in these sensitive discussions. But having said that, of course, they are also mindful of any repercussions and risks of sharing such information. So you are right. Generally, they are willing to share more, but it varies from organization to organization and depends on the environment and circumstances. For instance, whether there is preserved anonymity, whether there are Chatham House rules, uh, traffic light protocols is in place, and whether there are potential conflicts of interest. Yeah. So it does vary depending on the situation. As long as the information is safeguarded in terms of both their personal and organizational liabilities, uh, and their guardrails in place, they are willing to share in various degrees.
Yeah, I'm sure it can be challenging, especially when you maybe have competitors sitting at that same table trying to share information.
Right, right, right. So it really depends on the type of data and insight shared. If it's a sharing of best practices they adopt, they are generally fine. When it comes to sharing threat intelligence, it is already anonymized through established protocols, so that's fine as well. Similarly, for cyber incidents, it's reported through Cyware, which is a platform that most of the ISACs are using and OT-ISAC is using. So there is a sort of safe harbor protocol put in place in there. And if there are concerns and worries about being quoted, as I shared earlier, there are Chatham House rules, and sometimes the member does provide a disclaimer as well. In terms of competition, the information shared typically doesn't result in one competitor having an advantage over the other, especially when it's anonymized.
You have to make them feel comfortable about
Right.
being able to share.
Yes.
What are some of the other complications that you run into, especially when you have companies in different geographical locations, multiple jurisdictions?
Mm.
What are some of those complications that you run into, and how do you address them?
By far, we do not see much complications as long as the traffic light protocol is adhered to. Yeah, so indicators of compromise, indicators of attacks, indicators of exposures, and the TTPs, right, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, can only help and not harm the wider community at large. OTI for OTI side, we also based off the Geneva Manual by the Geneva Dialogue, and that is also largely based off the UN cyber norms. And of course, some of the key norms include the ability to share information on vulnerabilities to support early mitigation globally, as well as to cooperate by sharing of threat intelligence to prevent harmful practices that threaten international peace. So, as far as I've seen, I have not seen complications for member organizations who are MNCs and operate in multiple jurisdictions.
And how is the intelligence, the information, how is it disseminated so that it's useful? Like, for example, are you following any protocols so that it can be ingested by a SIM or some other kind of threat intelligence platform on the user's end? How is that
Mm.
information disseminated?
We disseminate information through a few ways. One is definitely through Cyware, where you get indicators of attacks, indicators of compromise, uh, um, the mitral attacks, TTPs, and so forth in the form of an advisory, in the form of an attachment, CSV delimited file that can be downloaded. That's a more manual process. It gets disseminated not just on the platform but as push emails as well. Um,
Hmm.
the more automated fashion which members prefer is through our MIPS, which is the malware information sharing platform that operates through REST API. So essentially, the IOCs and IOAs are automatically pulled down through the MIPS. And then it gets ingested by the member organizations who validates to depending on the extent they want to validate it, but they can actually push it automatically through SAW, right, to their firewalls, to their EDRs, load the hashes in to be able to proactively uh, defend themselves and protect their endpoints as well as servers
Hmm.
against those against those malware as well as Trojans on a more timely manner. It also supports Stix 2 and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So, in terms of the membership, uh, are your members concentrated in a few industries? And I guess what I'm asking is, what are you doing to have like a more diverse kind of um, number of industries represented among the membership? Are you constantly trying to recruit new members to join? And because obviously the more information that's available from different industries and different types of companies, the better the whole ecosystem benefits, right?
You're absolutely right. So OT-ISAC is non-profit. We try to get a diverse membership across the various critical information infrastructure sectors, CII sectors. Of course, it varies from nations to nations, varies from localities to localities in terms of the number of sectors, which sectors are classified as critical information infrastructure and which are not. But beyond those 11, 12, or 13 sectors, we also look at any of the other less critical sectors but have OT running. I mean, for argument's sake, any company that operates off an office these days are dealing with OT on a daily basis. Their lifts,
Right.
the smart buildings that they reside in is running off OT. Their access gantries, the lifts, the elevators, the escalators, the HVACs, right? I mean, we have definitely read about news of air conditions, conditioner units being compromised to breach into networks, right? Into company networks.
Right.
Uh, of course, we have also read about the casino that was breached due to a fish tank thermometer that was exposed to the internet. And not least, there's also been research done about how the electric power grid can be handicapped, uh, can blackout can ensue because someone managed to um, connect and to all the air conditioners and turn them on or off at the same time, or turn them on at the same time, right? Causing a large enough power surge to offload, to overload the grid itself. Yeah. So we do reach out to various industries and we try to find that uh, wider balance, right? It's not specific. Of course, there may be certain industries with more members, but we do have that overview across different industries, and that helps from an OT perspective. We can leverage the best practices in one industry, which may make sense for another industry. So, for instance, certain industries they are more mature in some of their approaches and best practices. And for instance, in the energy sectors, some of the more pragmatic ways of managing OT security can be cascaded to, for instance, the manufacturing sector, which has uh, generally a lower maturity, and are often times more targeted.
I love the point you made that basically every company is running OT in some fashion, and it's so true. Whether it's your building management system or right down to it's not just factories anymore. It's I guess is the point you're trying to make. It's so
Correct,
true.
correct. Yeah, the building management systems, building automation systems. In fact, I was involved in one of the technical references in Singapore itself. We developed the technical reference 111, which is really about securing buildings. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. There's a whole paper on it, and it becomes very important because that could become a conduit into more sensitive uh, resources in the company.
Right. And that's an area where there's still a lot of legacy technology that's probably vulnerable, probably no longer supported with security updates, et cetera, right?
Yes, indeed. I think, and it's often a blind spot. Most companies they focus.
Hmm.
If your business operations do not rely a lot on OT, your cybersecurity policies and standards predominantly is on securing IT. Yeah. But having smart buildings, UPSs, data centers, those need to be protected as well. Access control points, and exactly like what you have mentioned, a lot of them still runs off legacy systems that are slow in patching, hard to retrofit, especially at
Right.
scale. Yeah, and it's cost exorbitant to replace machinery. Beyond building systems, uh, look at cranes and other ships, vessels, right? Um, it's hard to retrofit. Yeah. As far
Right.
as I can remember, I also read about news about was it the nuclear subs that are still using floppy drives, right? How are you going to retrofit? Is going to be very cost exorbitant. Yeah. So
I can't remember the last time I saw a floppy drive.
yeah, indeed.
Let's talk about some upcoming initiatives for the OT-ISAC. And I understand that something's getting off the ground soon called the Domain Advisory Council. What can you tell me about that? I understand it's a pretty community-driven initiative with different pillars that you're targeting. What can you tell me about the Domain Advisory Circle?
Yeah, yeah. This OT-ISAC Domain Advisory Circle, it brings together practitioners in the OT space and comprised of four pillars. And the first pillar, engineering and architecture. Second pillar, threat intelligence. Third, risk and governance. And fourth, workforce development. The goal essentially is really to guide our strategic direction for memberships and to strengthen community-driven efforts in OT, SCADA, ICS, cyber physical systems, cybersecurity. So this circle comprises uh, renowned experts, including folks from the Singapore OT Cybersecurity Expert Panel. Um, Definitely a committee-driven initiative. So the advisory committee has come together and have provided the steer and proposed areas and the names of who we would approach and induct into these circles. And these practitioners are carefully selected and, as I've shared, they're highly regarded globally and regionally. And with their inputs, it will help with these focus groups. It will help. They will help provide thought leadership. They will help level up the maturity of some of the practices, both from the blue team perspective as well as red team, as well as and from the various aspects in terms of leveling up our ability to build our capabilities across the different sectors that have operational technology and to be able to better defend against emerging attacks, sophisticated attacks, whether it's AI driven and so forth, as
Hmm.
well as um, as we move into not just industry 4.0 but industry 5.0, right? So times are moving fast. I mean, technologies are moving at a very rapid pace. as we increasingly get interconnected, where the convergence of IT, OT, the boundaries between IT and OT gets blurred. Getting that mind share and thought leadership together becomes a bigger imperative.
And I is that why, for example, you're bringing in engineers and architecture folks into these conversations? I mean, of course, they're not necessarily cybersecurity experts, but maybe explain why it's so important to bring those types of individuals into these discussions.
I've alluded to that a bit earlier. We cannot secure the OT environment in the same way we secure our IT environment, and it is different from industry vertical to vertical. There are also operational nuances to be considered, and all too often, weakly designed architectures result in cyber incidents like ransomware, as what I've alluded to, the NotPetya ransomware that crippled Merck, FedEx, and quite a large number of logistics companies. And sharing, for instance, take an example of an architecture design. For instance, sharing the same domain controller for both IT and OT environments is a big no-no. As once the ransomware compromises the Active Directory, it will spread to all joint member systems and endpoints in the OT environment. And just some statistics, attacks on OT environments have increased dramatically, with the number of affected sites rising by 146% in 2024 as compared to 2023. And it's important, alluding back to your question, it's important to include um, engineers, folks with strong operational technology background. It could be uh, engineers when they first come to the workforce, and because they understand the friction that they face when they deal with cybersecurity controls. So a nuanced approach is ultimately important. For cybersecurity controls to be effective, it has to be implemented in an as frictionless manner as possible. Because humans being humans, if there is too much friction, the controls will be circumvented, right?
Right.
And therefore, that conversation and that co-creation between cyber and non-cyber engineers becomes all the more important. Take for instance, zero trust. Doesn't mean that you need to implement zero trust network architecture across an OT environment, micro segmentation, SD-WAN across unmanaged switches, and so forth. The answer is no. Ultimately, it is the principle and the approach that is important. There are many ways to skin the cat, for lack of a better phrase. And the way to most effectively achieve that security outcome is to sit down together with the engineers and be able to come up with a pragmatic approach.
And I would imagine you have to deliver that message about security kind of in their language, so to speak, and talk on, terms that they deal with rather than, a lot of security jargon, for example.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Typically, it's really about um, practicality versus risk and be able to illustrate that in terms of day-to-day operational aspects, be able to get them to understand what are the kind of operational impact if a threat turns out to be a successful incident. So most OT and cyber engineers would rely on the Purdue model as well as ISA 62443 as a guide for the protection of zones and conduits. So I use this as an example.
Hmm.
So I mentioned about practicality versus risk, right? But so ISA 62443, depending on the industry vertical and operational nuances, some of the controls in ISA 62443 may result in an overabundance of friction to the operational processes. So the language, the lingo that is used in the conversations with non-security members have to be about their operational processes, how the code is being loaded into the PLCs, how
Hmm.
the HMIs communicate with the PLCs, what can happen to the HMIs, how the historians can be assessed is really about from their perspective, their ability to assess them and get their job done, right?
Right.
So I mean, passwords, if we can't possibly in many of the OT environments, you can't possibly have very complex passwords because you could be having operators on the ground wearing their gloves or using greased fingers to key on to punch down on the keyboards, and they don't,
Hmm.
if they don't deal with IT on the daily basis, right? They are dealing with machines. So authentication has to be approached in a different way, different manner from desk-bound users. So this understanding and appreciation of the kind of work processes becomes important, and using that language uh, that is meaningful to these engineers, talking about their work processes will have better relevance to them.
I mean, it's a real opportunity as well to introduce these concepts like secure by design to secure by default, secure development much earlier, before things go into implementation. If you're involving engineers and you're involving the asset owners much earlier, correct?
That's right. That's right. Um, Ideally, it should be greenfield from the start.
Right.
Uh, Before you set up a manufacturing plant, before you set up the whole OT environment, um, security is incorporated into the design of the entire architecture, how the fiber is laid, how the equipment is assessed and maintained, and so forth. Um, it and exactly like what you have alluded to, it goes beyond security by design. I think there's a lot of discussion. I mean, CISA has been preaching security by design for the longest time, and recently they have gone into security by default and security in deployment, right? How to deploy correctly, and I think that's important. I mean, these are not new concepts. These have been around when Microsoft first coined it some 20 years back. Um, but it is important, and the right emphasis put in at the right time becomes very relevant. Like especially with supply chain risks on the increase, how do we ensure that there is no concentration risks and dependencies, that we look at how we design our communications with our supply chain as we increasingly use the cloud, how this communications is put in place, how do we maintain cybersecurity. It is not a one-off. That's what I'm trying to say. So security by design uh, tends to give that notion to the lay person as if it is a one-off kind of process. Once you design,
Right.
you deploy according to what you design, hands off. And that is not the case. When we deploy systems, it must be hardened, secure by default. I think the vendors are increasingly doing that now. They are not going to by default load in all the bells and whistles and enable everything from the start. They are going to lock it down, and you have to turn on the bells and whistles as per need basis. The deployment piece is important. I mean, security degrades over time. How many leaky AWS buckets have we seen in the news being reported to be leaking sensitive information and so forth? So this has to be put in place, and that comes with engineers and design teams. We can use various ways of illustration, the way we storytell. Uh, we can use COVID as a good example. I mean, about
Mhm.
how we limit the attack surface, how we control spread of the COVID virus can be shared, and that has analogies can be and draw references from that can be incorporated in the designs. And when we share with engineers how uh, COVID is being addressed in nations and localities, how there are quarantine zones and there's segmentation, then they'll understand better why network segmentation is so important in an OT environment. Yeah. After all, it's not if but when incidents may happen. So this,
Right.
yeah. So this illustration can help in furthering security by design, default and deployment.
I'm curious. Do you hear your members? Are they bringing discussions to you or to the table if you have events about rethinking vulnerability management, for example, and thinking more about exposure management, and just why that matters in an OT environment more so than just trying to mitigate vulnerabilities and patching them, et cetera. Talk to me a little bit about what you're hearing around exposure management, for example.
I think exposure management is really about limiting the attack surface. An attack surface management tool is required and extends to dark web monitoring, extends to typo squad domains that is used for phishing or drive-by attacks exposed to leaked credentials and beyond. And it's really beyond what a typical vulnerability management tool would cater for. And limiting the blast radius, as I mentioned as well, is a key scope of OT. As alluded to, it is hard to patch OT because the patches need to be past stringent validation controls for safety reasons, right? I mean, in OT environment, unlike the IT environment, which focuses very much that, I mean, we are all very familiar with the CIA threat of cybersecurity. In IT environment, confidentiality is one of
Sure.
the areas, and for OT environment, safety, availability, and integrity becomes very important. So we do not want to end up with cases of patches causing a self-inflicted denial of service attack. So when we look back at WannaCry, I think in Australia, Queensland hospitals, right? They installed the MS1710 fix, and it disrupted their hospital networks. It disrupted the hospital equipment. They went down, they crashed, and so so patches need to be thoroughly tested and certified by OT companies, OT vendors, and that
Right.
takes a long time. And that process is slow because of the safety reasons I mentioned about. Imagine the life support system crashing, right? I mean, I've heard of ECG machines getting ransomware. Quite surprised by that, but that has happened. So, um, so therefore, the way we address OT vulnerabilities, patching is just one means. There are many different ways to address vulnerability exposure, and that also includes network segmentation, reducing the attack surface. You can put in a jump host, you can put in a secret jump host, you can put limit the east-west traffic. If two Windows machines on two different sets of equipment have no reason to communicate with one another, they are not sharing files and so forth, why are we allowing the Windows protocol traffic to be chatted why do are we allowing the Windows chatter, the comms chatter between both machines? We can just stop that chatter and block it out. Most of the ransomware attacks are riding on Windows communication protocol. So if we can
Right.
stop that, we can limit the blast radius. We can therefore also mitigate down the risk that vulnerabilities are exposed to be exploited. If the
Hmm.
vulnerabilities are exposed to jump hosts that can be patched, that means users need to connect to the jump host before they connect to the remotely to the HMIs, for instance. Then but any vulnerabilities on the HMIs are not exposed to attacks except to the trusted jump host. That is patch, right? So the hacker can the worm that exploits the same vulnerability continuously will already be stopped by the jump host that is already secure.
I mean, I guess what we're talking about ultimately is this whole notion of resilience. And now that, a lot of OT is reachable over the internet, I'm sure that it's really impacting discussions about how to configure these devices safely, how to safely connect them to the internet. I'm sure you're hearing a lot about those kinds of discussions, right?
Well, divers in the details, I think the OT is never directly reachable over the internet. Yes, there is a need to communicate with the cloud for instance, for data analytics, as we for sensors, IoTs to send telemetry to the cloud, and then for predictive analytics and so forth. Um, that's outbound connections, and typically there will be gateways to shield these devices from the internet. I know the unfortunate truth is that if you use Shodan, some of the search engines, you can still find misconfigured OT equipment exposed to the internet. I think
Hmm.
I should not mention the brand, but there was a structure where building automation system that if you do a search on Shodan, you can see a lot of them on the internet. I was sharing in a talk a couple of years back how a 9-year-old kid can learn to hack into critical information, learn to hack into smart buildings very easily. You go to the NVD database, look at the CVEs, look at the versions that are vulnerable. The exploit link is right in the NVD, right?
Right.
And what do you do next? Simply use Shodan to search for exposed equipment with that vulnerable version number. And there you go, you have the IP address, you just need to download the exploit and run it. And so the barriers of entry to hacking has really been lowered with all the information sharing. That's the downside. Yeah. Um, but having said that, so OT, in terms of exposure for, I mentioned about the convergence of IT OT. Now the boundaries are great. But having said that, a zero trust approach is still required, right? I can't
Right.
imagine someone sitting in Starbucks or any other cafe and fidgeting with controls for a water treatment plant. Yeah, or
It's a
fidgeting
little scary.
control is a little scary. Yeah. So the initial notion of zero trust is that with zero trust you do not need VPNs anymore. You can have anytime, anywhere computing. It's about user identities. It's about verifying the access controls and so on. But that's the digital world. We still need that physical security. What if this engineer is subjected to duress? His notebook gets stolen. He goes to a toilet break,
Hmm.
and this is critical infrastructure. So zero trust doesn't just look at the digital realm. We need to look at the physical realm as well. So
Right.
resilience goes beyond the protection to the really the ability to detect, contain, and recover fast from any OT-based attacks. And OT-based attacks have been on the increase. That means solely OT-based attack. We have seen that happen in Pipe Dream. We have seen that happen in Foxnet. I think we are reaching double digits soon. We have Foxnet was the eighth OT specific malware. So attacks typically come from IT to OT, spread from IT to OT, but we are increasingly seeing OT specific attacks. So
Hmm.
what I'm trying to allude to is not just sufficient to in fact limit the attack surface by putting in controls in terms of the type of data and traffic that goes between the internet and the OT environment. But the OT environment itself also needs to be secure against USB thumb drives, against GPS jamming, spoofing, and other forms of cyber physical attacks. I mean, drones have been used to jam wireless access points in industrial wireless APs, right?
Yeah.
So can you imagine that happening? Somebody at the SOC, Security Operations Center, looking at the screen, hey, my or NOC seeing that the wireless AP has gone offline. How on earth are they going to tell that it was caused by a drone that has
By a
done
drone, right?
went close to the access point and has done a jamming attack using an RF jammer, for instance?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
It's
cyber physical telemetry also becomes important. So resilience uh, is really about reducing that what is otherwise known as the V, right? I think World Economic Forum has come up with a very nice chart about how what the resilience is really about shrinking that V. What it means by the V is that availability. When it's at the top, but when there is an attack, you want to reduce the drop from the top to the bottom, and that drop can be reduced by limiting your attack surface, right? Limiting your blast radius, and the recovery, which is moving back up, that V ascending. After you descend, you want to ascend back up to your availability. It's about detecting, containing, and recovering fast from an incident, where your cyber incident response plans come into play, where your business continuity plans, your crisis management plans come into play. The ability to recover back from that crisis becomes absolutely important. Yeah. So reducing
mhm.
B is shrinking that circle where the B is what resilience is really all about.
I mean, it's really fascinating that we're having this kind of sophisticated discussions about OT, and I guess it's a sign of maturity overall, right?
Yes, yes. I think over time, all the news and what is happening in through the geopolitical situation, with the geopolitical situation in various parts of the world, and the kind of
Hmm.
that have been used at the cyber front, it has really raised awareness to the layperson as well.
All right, Stephen. I think that's a good place to leave it for now. I really enjoyed this discussion. I think people are going to have a lot of good reactions and interactions with this one. You brought up a lot of interesting points, so I'm very anxious to see how people receive this. So, but thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All righty, thank you. Bye bye.